December 1944, the Ardennes Forest on the Belgian-German border. A small convoy of 3 American jeeps rolled through the foggy darkness, headlights dimmed to narrow slits. The vehicles moved with confidence, displaying all the correct markings of the U.S. 28th Infantry Division. The men inside wore regulation U.S. Army uniforms, carried American weapons, and even smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes. One soldier casually chewed gum while checking a map by flashlight. But these weren't Americans. They were members of Commando Otto Skorzeny's Operation Greif, perhaps the most audacious infiltration mission of World War II. For the next 10 days, these German commandos would spread panic, change road signs, cut communication lines, and sow chaos throughout the American lines, until a simple question about baseball exposed their deception and brought their mission to an end. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When photographs of the first captured German spies reached American intelligence officers in late December 1944, the response was stunned disbelief. The captured men wore perfect American uniforms down to the last detail. Unit patches, rank insignia, even the correct placement of medal ribbons. They carried regulation M1 Garand rifles and Colt 45 pistols. Their identification papers were flawless. Even their haircuts matched American military standards. To American counterintelligence officers who had spent years watching for German infiltration attempts, this level of preparation seemed impossible. One intelligence report from December 20th described the captured spies as indistinguishable from genuine American soldiers in appearance, equipment, and basic knowledge of American military organization. The Americans had confidence in their security measures. Passwords changed daily. Checkpoints verified identification papers. MPs routinely stopped and questioned soldiers in rear areas. How could German infiltrators possibly slip through such a robust system? This confidence would prove dangerously misplaced. Operation Greif was not a hasty improvisation. It was the product of meticulous planning, extensive training, and ruthless preparation. In October 1944, Adolf Hitler had summoned Otto Skorzeny to his headquarters in East Prussia. Skorzeny had already earned fame for his daring rescue of Mussolini from Italian captivity in 1943, an operation that had made him Hitler's favorite commando. The Führer's instructions were brutally clear. As part of the upcoming Ardennes offensive, what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, Skorzeny would lead a special operation to infiltrate American lines, cause maximum confusion, and seize critical bridges over the Meuse River before they could be destroyed. The specifications for selecting men were incredibly demanding. Volunteers needed fluent English with American accents, detailed knowledge of American culture, and the physical bearing of American soldiers. Finding such men in the German military of late 1944 proved nearly impossible. Most German soldiers with excellent English were already serving as translators or intelligence officers.
Those with American connections had often been viewed with suspicion earlier in the war. The pool of qualified candidates was vanishingly small. Despite these challenges, Skorzeny managed to assemble approximately 150 English-speaking volunteers from various Wehrmacht and SS units. Of these, only about 10 spoke English well enough to truly pass as Americans. These men would form the core infiltration teams. The rest would wear American uniforms but avoid conversation, operating in supporting roles. In early November 1944, these selected men assembled at a secret training facility near Friedenthal, Germany. There, they underwent perhaps the most unusual training program of the war. American uniforms, captured in bulk during the early days of the offensive, were carefully studied and replicated. German tailors modified Wehrmacht uniforms to match American cuts and styles. Insignia and patches were meticulously reproduced. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lieutenant Maria Koenig, one of the few female officers in Skorzeny's command, supervised what became known as Americanization classes. A German-American who had returned to Germany in 1939, Koenig had spent years in Chicago and New York. Her knowledge of American slang, mannerisms, and customs proved invaluable. "You don't say, 'I require petrol,'" she instructed her students. "You say, 'I need gas.' You don't take a photograph, you take a picture. You don't stand at attention unless directly ordered. Americans are casual with superior officers in ways that would get you court-martialed in the Wehrmacht." The training extended far beyond language. The Commandos learned how to walk like Americans, with a loose, casual gait rather than the stiff German march. They practiced American table manners, learning to hold their forks in their right hands rather than European style in the left. They learned to chew gum, something rare in wartime Germany. They smoked cigarettes in the American style, drawing the smoke directly into the lungs rather than the European method of holding smoke in the mouth. Most critically, they absorbed American military procedures: how to salute, how to address officers, the correct way to wear equipment, the proper placement of insignia, the chain of command within American units, standard operating procedures at checkpoints and guard posts. The equipment challenges proved daunting. While Skorzeny had requested 25 captured American jeeps, his men received only 6 in working condition. American weapons were similarly scarce, with barely enough M1 rifles and .45 pistols to equip the primary infiltration teams. The majority of Skorzeny's force would have to make do with German weapons, hoping not to be inspected too closely. On December 14, 1944, 2 days before the Ardennes offensive began, Skorzeny briefed his commandos on their specific missions. Each team received its objectives, routes, recognition signals, and emergency procedures. They would enter American lines in the chaos following the initial German breakthrough, then spread out across the American rear areas. "Remember," Skorzeny told them, "your job is not primarily combat. You create confusion. You change road signs to send reinforcements in the wrong direction. You cut telephone lines.
You issue contradictory orders to American units. You spread rumors of German breakthroughs. If you encounter senior American officers, you assassinate them. But above all, you survive to reach the Meuse bridges and secure them for our advancing forces." The legal implications were dire. Soldiers caught wearing enemy uniforms were not protected by the Geneva Conventions. They could be, and almost certainly would be, executed as spies. Every commando understood the stakes. Discovery meant death. The initial breakthrough on December 16th opened gaps in the American lines that Skorzeny's teams quickly exploited. Moving in their captured jeeps or on foot in small groups, the German infiltrators began filtering through the Ardennes Forest into American-controlled territory. What they found surprised them. The American rear areas seemed almost impossibly disorganized compared to German standards. Soldiers wandered without clear purpose. Supply convoys moved with minimal security. Officers issued orders casually, often without checking identifications. The American military's organizational looseness, something the Germans had previously mocked, now worked in the infiltrators' favor. Lieutenant Koenig led one of the first teams through, driving a captured jeep with 3 other commandos dressed as American MPs. Her assignment was among the most audacious: infiltrate the headquarters of the U.S. First Army in Spa, Belgium, locate General Courtney Hodges, and, if possible, assassinate him. The Americans were in complete disarray, she later reported. We passed dozens of checkpoints where exhausted MPs barely glanced at our papers. We redirected 2 lost tank battalions by simply changing signs at crossroads. No one questioned our authority as military police. The ease of initial infiltration bred overconfidence. On the second day, Koenig's team encountered an American fuel depot outside Malmedy. Seeing an opportunity, they approached the sergeant in charge, claiming to be delivering urgent orders to reroute the fuel trucks. The sergeant seemed suspicious from the start, Koenig recalled. He kept asking questions about where we had come from, our unit designation, who had sent us.
Then he casually asked who won the 1943 World Series. None of Skorzeny's extensive cultural training had covered baseball statistics. Koenig attempted to deflect, claiming she didn't follow the sport. The sergeant pressed harder, asking who played third base for the Yankees. When she couldn't answer, he drew his sidearm and ordered the team to put their hands up. Within hours, news of captured German spies in American uniforms spread through command channels like wildfire. Counterintelligence officers recognized the implications immediately. If some infiltrators had been caught, others were certainly still at large. Security measures tightened drastically overnight. New checkpoints appeared at every crossroad. Passwords became more complex and changed every few hours rather than daily. Most significantly, MPs began asking questions that only Americans could be expected to answer. Baseball statistics, the names of state capitals, popular radio shows, or film stars. The baseball test quickly became standard procedure. Rumors magnified the threat exponentially. Reports claimed that German commandos were planning to assassinate Eisenhower. Others suggested infiltrators would poison water supplies or sabotage ammunition depots.
The most alarming rumors held that Skorzeny himself had undergone plastic surgery to look like an American general and was already operating inside Allied headquarters. Security around senior officers became suffocating. Eisenhower was virtually imprisoned in his headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by rings of guards who challenged anyone approaching, regardless of rank. Generals and colonels found themselves detained at checkpoints until their identities could be verified by officers who knew them personally. As security tightened, Skorzeny's teams found movement increasingly difficult. Roadblocks appeared everywhere. Patrols stopped and searched all vehicles. MPs demanded answers to cultural questions that had never been covered in training. The operational environment transformed from permissive to hostile in a matter of days. Some teams attempted to adapt. One group, led by Sergeant Wilhelm Schmidt, abandoned their Jeep and American uniforms, changing into civilian clothes stolen from a Belgian farmhouse. They continued their mission on foot, posing as local refugees. Another team, commanded by Lieutenant Hans Müller, maintained their cover by memorizing baseball facts from a small reference card prepared hurriedly by an intelligence officer who had studied in America before the war. Koenig's team, after barely escaping the fuel depot incident, regrouped in a forested area 10 kilometers behind American lines. Their Jeep abandoned, weapons hidden, they assessed their options. The mission to reach 1st Army headquarters now seemed impossible. American counterintelligence would be alert for infiltrators, especially near high-value targets. "We need to adapt our mission," Koenig told her team. "If we can't reach Spa, we can still disrupt communications along the main supply routes. That serves our ultimate objective, slowing American reinforcements heading to the front." For the next 3 days, Koenig's team moved only at night, cutting telephone lines where they found them exposed, removing road signs, and, at one point, successfully redirecting an entire artillery battalion down a road that led away from its intended position. They avoided checkpoints entirely, moving cross-country through the dense Ardennes Forest. The situation for all infiltration teams deteriorated rapidly as American counterintelligence mobilized fully. By December 21st, 5 days into Operation Greif, 18 German commandos had been captured. Under interrogation and facing execution as spies, several revealed details of the operation, including approximate numbers of infiltrators and general mission parameters. Armed with this intelligence, American security forces refined their countermeasures. They began checking serial numbers on weapons and equipment against known captured items. They implemented a system of constantly changing hand signals to supplement passwords. Most effectively, they instituted paired checkpoints, where soldiers cleared at one checkpoint would be checked again a kilometer later with different questions and different passwords. This layered security proved devastating to the remaining infiltration teams. Moving between American positions became nearly impossible without encountering multiple checkpoints. Each interaction with American personnel carried increasing risk of exposure. On December 22nd, Koenig's team encountered disaster.
Attempting to bypass a checkpoint on a secondary road, they stumbled into an American patrol conducting a sweep specifically looking for infiltrators. In the brief firefight that followed, 2 of Koenig's team were killed. She and her remaining teammate, Corporal Joseph Weber, escaped into the forest,
but were separated in the darkness. Alone, with minimal supplies and no communications, Koenig made the difficult decision to abandon the mission. Her focus shifted to survival and, if possible, return to German lines. Moving only at night, sleeping in abandoned hunting blinds or hay barns during daylight, she began working her way eastward toward what she hoped were advancing German forces. The overall German offensive, however, had already culminated. The furthest penetration had been achieved, and American reinforcements were arriving in massive numbers. Far from advancing to the Meuse as planned, German forces were now struggling to maintain their gains. The strategic context of Operation Greif had fundamentally changed. By Christmas Day, 1944, most of the surviving infiltrators recognized their situation was untenable. Some attempted to return to German lines, discarding American uniforms and equipment to avoid execution if captured. Others, cut off and isolated, hid among Belgian civilians, hoping to eventually make their way to neutral territory. A few, still committed to their mission despite the odds, continued attempts to disrupt American operations wherever possible. On December 26th, Koenig encountered an abandoned American Jeep partially hidden in a roadside drainage culvert. The vehicle still had fuel and appeared operational. After checking carefully for booby traps, she managed to start it. Wearing her American uniform again and driving alone, she attempted to pass through American lines by posing as a nurse from an evacuation hospital trying to rejoin her unit. At a checkpoint outside Bastogne, her journey ended. The suspicious MP began with simple questions: her unit, destination, why she was traveling alone. When she provided plausible answers, he shifted to cultural questions. "Who's married to Betty Grable?" he asked casually. Koenig had no idea. She attempted to deflect, claiming exhaustion and urgent medical duties. The MP's next question sealed her fate. "What's the name of Donald Duck's girlfriend?" Her silence answered for her. Within minutes, Koenig found herself disarmed and under arrest, joining dozens of other captured infiltrators being held at a special detention facility near Liège. The intelligence value of these captures proved enormous. American counterintelligence officers learned that Skorzeny had neither undergone plastic surgery nor personally infiltrated Allied lines. He had remained with the main German forces, coordinating the operation from behind German lines. They discovered that the number of English-speaking infiltrators was much smaller than feared, barely a dozen with sufficient language skills to maintain cover under questioning. Most importantly, they learned the primary objective had been the Meuse bridges, not assassination of senior commanders. This intelligence allowed security measures to be appropriately targeted. Protection of key infrastructure intensified, while the paralyzing restrictions on headquarters operations gradually relaxed. The operational paralysis that had gripped the American command system began to ease. The legacy of Operation Greif extended far beyond its tactical achievements, which were minimal.
No bridges were captured, no senior officers assassinated. Few units were significantly delayed by misdirection. Yet the psychological impact was profound and lasting. American security consciousness, somewhat lax before the Ardennes offensive, transformed permanently. The fate of the captured infiltrators was determined by military tribunals. As they had expected, the verdict was death by firing squad for those caught in American uniforms. Koenig and 16 others faced execution on January 13, 1945, at a holding facility near Henri-Chapelle, Belgium. Before facing the firing squad, Koenig reportedly told an American guard, "We knew the risks. Skorzeny selected us because we would take those risks for Germany. Your baseball saved you, but remember, next time we'll memorize the World Series." The tactical failure of Operation Greif obscured its strategic impact. For nearly a week, the American command structure had been paralyzed by security concerns. Generals couldn't move freely. Communications became cumbersome as authentication procedures multiplied. Reinforcements faced delays at countless checkpoints. The operation demonstrated how a small number of infiltrators, less than 150 men, could create effects disproportionate to their numbers through psychological impact alone. The shockwaves from Operation Greif continued long after the Battle of the Bulge concluded. Military historians consider it among the most successful deception operations of the war, not for its tactical achievements, which were modest, but for its psychological impact. The specter of German infiltrators in American uniforms transformed security protocols throughout the European theater. Password systems became more elaborate, authentication procedures grew increasingly sophisticated. Paranoia, once ignited, proved difficult to extinguish. Even as late as March 1945, with Germany clearly defeated, American MPs still stopped officers and asked about Joe DiMaggio's batting average. The effectiveness of the operation stands in stark contrast to its limited scope. The German High Command had allocated minimal resources, barely 150 personnel and a handful of captured vehicles, yet achieved strategic effects that influenced operations across the entire front. This disproportion between input and outcome offers lessons that military planners continue to study today. Small investments in deception can yield outsized returns. After the war, during extensive debriefings, Allied intelligence officers sought to understand how the German infiltrators had prepared so thoroughly. What emerged was a picture of meticulous attention to detail combined with extraordinary adaptability. Lieutenant Maria Koenig had not been the only female officer involved in the operation, a fact that surprised American interrogators who had assumed all infiltrators were male. Captain Elsa Brunner had served as the primary language instructor, drilling the commandos on American slang, pronunciation, and conversational patterns. The Americans have thousands of regional accents, she explained to her students. If questioned about your unusual pronunciation, say you're from Minnesota or Maine. Those accents sound strange even to other Americans. This insight proved invaluable to infiltrators who couldn't perfect their speech.
When questioned about their accents, they simply claimed to be from remote regions, satisfying most casual interrogators. The decision to include women in leadership roles had been controversial within the German military hierarchy, but Skorzeny had insisted. The Americans have women in their military auxiliary services, he argued. Their presence in our operation provides additional cover options. This pragmatic approach overrode traditional German military conservatism, demonstrating Skorzeny's willingness to challenge conventions when mission requirements demanded it. The captured infiltrators revealed the intensive training regimen they had undergone. Each morning began with American military drill procedures rather than German ones. They ate from American mess kits using American utensils. They slept on American-style cots rather than German bunks. They addressed each other using American military titles and slang. They studied American military newspapers, particularly Stars and Stripes, memorizing current events, sports scores, and popular culture references. We lived as Americans for weeks before the mission, one captured commando explained. We didn't just memorize facts, we immersed ourselves in American identity. This cultural immersion approach proved more effective than rote memorization of facts that might be checked at checkpoints. Infiltrators who truly understood American culture could improvise convincing responses rather than reciting prepared answers. The most successful teams had developed contingency plans for cultural questioning. Unable to memorize every possible American cultural reference, they created plausible personal backgrounds that explained knowledge gaps. One team claimed to be replacement troops, fresh from stateside training, justifying their unfamiliarity with European theater operations. Another posed as administrative personnel from a quartermaster unit, explaining their limited knowledge of frontline activities. These cover stories, combined with genuine American mannerisms and language patterns, allowed several teams to operate undetected for days. The psychological impact of Operation Greif rippled through the American command structure in ways that far exceeded its operational footprint. General Omar Bradley later wrote that the infiltration caused a wave of near hysteria to sweep through the Allied forces. Rumors magnified the actual threat exponentially. Intelligence estimates suggesting hundreds of English-speaking German agents were operating behind American lines prompted draconian security measures that significantly impeded operations. Every staff officer became a potential imposter. Every unusual order was scrutinized for signs of enemy deception. Communications became laborious as authentication procedures multiplied. The cumulative effect was a temporary paralysis of the American command system at precisely the moment when rapid response to the German offensive was most critical. For Skorzeny, this outcome represented success despite the capture of most of his commandos. The primary objective, seizing the Meuse bridges, proved unattainable, but the secondary objective, creating confusion and delay, succeeded beyond expectations. With minimal resources, the operation had achieved strategic impact through psychological warfare rather than direct action.
The American counterintelligence response evolved rapidly as the pattern of infiltration became clear. Initial reactions had been haphazard and often counterproductive. The baseball quiz approach sometimes backfired when legitimate American soldiers from immigrant backgrounds or rural areas couldn't answer questions about popular culture. One apocryphal but widely believed story described a general being detained because he couldn't name all 7 dwarfs from Snow White. Colonel Robert Shaw, Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence at SHAEF, recognized that unfocused paranoia was causing more harm than the infiltrators themselves. He implemented a more systematic approach, distributing standardized authentication procedures that balance security with operational efficiency. Simple but effective measures replaced arbitrary questioning. Paired checkpoints with different passwords, ID cards with embedded security features, and a rotating system of recognition signals that changed every 6 hours. These protocols remain the foundation of modern counter-infiltration procedures. Contemporary military forces still use many of the techniques developed in response to Operation Greif, refined but recognizable. The multi-layered authentication approach, something you have, identification, something you know, password, and something you are, behavior, forms the basis of security systems from military checkpoints to digital networks. The fate of the captured infiltrators became a matter of international controversy. Under the laws of war, soldiers captured in enemy uniforms were not entitled to prisoner of war status. They could legally be treated as spies and executed. American authorities, after military tribunals confirmed the infiltrator status, scheduled executions for those captured in American uniform. Lieutenant Maria Koenig, facing execution on January 13, 1945, maintained remarkable composure. When offered the opportunity to write final letters home, she declined, stating, "My family knew the risks when I volunteered. They understand sacrifice." Her stoicism impressed even the American officers responsible for her confinement and eventual execution. The night before the scheduled executions, an unexpected legal challenge emerged. Colonel Leon Jaworski, who would later gain fame as the Watergate special prosecutor, reviewed the case files and raised concerns about procedural irregularities. The tribunals had established that the infiltrators wore American uniforms, but had not conclusively demonstrated that they had engaged in espionage or sabotage, the legal predicates for execution rather than prisoner of war status. Jaworski argued that merely wearing enemy uniform was insufficient grounds for execution under the Geneva Conventions. The infiltrators would need to have been proven to have used that disguise to gather intelligence or commit hostile acts. Many had been captured before they could execute their missions, creating a legal gray area. This nuanced legal argument resulted in a temporary stay of execution while higher authorities reviewed the cases.
For Koenig and several others, this review process extended past the German surrender in May 1945, effectively commuting their death sentences to imprisonment. Koenig ultimately served 3 years in military prison before being released in 1948 during the general amnesty that accompanied the establishment of West Germany. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The technical aspects of the infiltration operation revealed the impressive adaptability of Skorzeny's command. Working with severely limited resources, they had created convincing disguises that passed initial inspection. German craftsmen had modified Wehrmacht uniforms to match American cuts and styles. Engineers had repainted German vehicles in olive drab, adding appropriate markings and serial numbers. Armorers had refurbished captured American weapons to working condition. The attention to detail extended to the smallest accessories. German soldiers typically carried their paybooks, identification, and personal papers in a dedicated document wallet issued by their units. American soldiers tended to keep such items loosely in their pockets, often along with personal items like letters from home, pocket knives, or lucky charms. The infiltrators carefully replicated this tendency, carrying deliberately weathered and creased documents interspersed with fabricated personal items. Captured American cigarettes were distributed to the infiltrators, who were instructed to smoke them conspicuously. German soldiers typically held cigarettes between thumb and forefinger, while Americans more often used index and middle finger. The Commandos practiced the American style for weeks before deployment. Even money received meticulous attention. German intelligence had obtained samples of American military payment certificates and soldiers' personal cash. Counterfeit American currency was produced and distributed to the infiltrators in appropriate denominations, mostly small bills with deliberate wear patterns exactly as American soldiers would carry. These details, seemingly trivial individually, created a convincing composite identity when combined. An American MP conducting a casual inspection would see appropriate uniforms, equipment, documentation, personal items, and behaviors all consistent with legitimate American personnel. Only under sustained questioning or specialized scrutiny would discrepancies emerge. The infiltration teams received extensive training in American vehicle operation. German and American vehicles differed significantly in control layout, startup procedures, and maintenance requirements. Teams practiced with the limited number of captured American Jeeps until operating them became second nature. They learned American convoy procedures, hand signals, and driving habits. The plan included contingencies for language barriers. Infiltrators with limited English were paired with fluent speakers who would handle complex interactions. If separated from their language specialists, less fluent infiltrators had cover stories ready. They were recent immigrants still learning English, or they had grown up in isolated German-speaking communities in America. The infiltration strategy involved multiple penetration methods. Some teams entered American lines in captured vehicles, posing as MPs or reconnaissance units. Others infiltrated on foot, joining the streams of American stragglers retreating from the initial German onslaught. Some posed as reinforcements moving forward, while others claimed to be headquarters staff relocating to new command posts.
This diversity of approach complicated American counterintelligence efforts. No single security measure could detect all infiltration methods. Checkpoints might catch vehicle-borne infiltrators but miss those on foot. Documentation checks would identify some imposters but miss others with perfectly forged papers. Cultural questioning worked against some teams but not those with genuinely fluent English speakers. The infiltration teams operated with remarkable initiative once behind American lines. Their orders provided general objectives but left specific methods to the team leader's discretion. This mission-oriented approach allowed them to adapt to unexpected conditions and exploit opportunities as they arose. One team, finding themselves near an American field hospital, created confusion by spreading rumors of German paratroop drops nearby, causing the hospital to initiate hasty evacuation procedures that tied up roads and diverted military police to escort duties. Another team, encountering an ammunition supply point lightly guarded, didn't attack directly, but instead falsely reported to nearby American units that the depot was being targeted for German artillery strikes, prompting its abandonment. Lieutenant Koenig's team demonstrated particularly creative adaptation.
Finding their primary route to 1st Army headquarters blocked by unexpected American reinforcements, they diverted to a secondary mission, disrupting communications along the Malmedy-St. Vith road. Rather than cutting telephone lines directly, they posed as Signal Corps personnel testing the lines, disconnecting sections and reconnecting them incorrectly, creating communications problems that were difficult to diagnose and appeared to be technical failures rather than sabotage. The American counterintelligence response evolved from initial panic to systematic methodology. Colonel Shao established a dedicated counter-infiltration section that collected data on all suspected infiltrators, analyzed patterns, and distributed identification guidelines to field units. This centralized approach proved critical to containing the threat. The CIS developed the Authenticate and Verify procedure that remains standard practice in military operations. Rather than relying solely on passwords or cultural questions, this approach combined multiple verification methods. Initial authentication used standardized challenges and responses. Secondary verification involved knowledge or behavior patterns difficult for infiltrators to replicate. Final confirmation often relied on personal recognition by trusted personnel. The most effective countermeasure proved to be paired checkpoints. The first checkpoint would authenticate using standard procedures, then notify a second checkpoint, invisible from the first, about vehicles cleared through. The second checkpoint would use different authentication methods. This layered approach caught several infiltration teams that had successfully passed initial inspection but couldn't maintain their cover through repeated questioning. By December 23rd, 7 days into Operation Greif, American counterintelligence had largely contained the infiltration threat. Most teams had been captured or forced into hiding. Communication lines between teams had been severed. The psychological impact remained substantial, but the operational effectiveness of the infiltrators had been neutralized.
For the remaining infiltrators, the mission shifted from active operations to survival and, if possible, return to German lines. With American forces now alert to their presence and security measures tightening daily, continuing the original mission became impossible. Team leaders made individual decisions about how to proceed based on their specific circumstances. Some abandoned their American disguises and equipment, reverting to German uniforms hidden in caches before the operation. They hoped that if captured, they would receive normal prisoner-of-war treatment rather than execution as spies. Others maintained their cover, believing it still offered the best chance of survival behind enemy lines. A few attempted to reach neutral territory, particularly Switzerland, where they might avoid capture entirely. Lieutenant Koenig, after her capture on December 26th, underwent intensive interrogation. American intelligence officers were particularly interested in her role as one of the few female officers involved in the operation. Her training in American culture and language had been more extensive than most of the male infiltrators, making her cover identity more convincing. During interrogation, Koenig maintained military discipline, providing only her name, rank, and service number as required by the Geneva Conventions. When pressed about the broader operation, she replied simply, "I followed legal orders as a German officer. I wore an enemy uniform for military purposes, which has precedent in this war on both sides." This reference to Allied special operations that had similarly used enemy uniforms, particularly British commando operations, created discomfort among her interrogators. Several Allied special operations had indeed involved personnel wearing German uniforms for infiltration or deception purposes. This moral equivalence complicated the legal case against the German infiltrators. The legal proceedings against the captured infiltrators revealed the complex intersection of military necessity, international law, and battlefield ethics. The military tribunals had to address fundamental questions. Did wearing an enemy uniform constitute perfidy, treacherous conduct, under the laws of war? Did it forfeit protection under the Geneva Conventions? Did the intent matter? Was infiltration for reconnaissance different from infiltration for sabotage? These questions had no simple answers. Military legal traditions held that soldiers captured in enemy uniforms could be treated as spies rather than prisoners of war. However, the actual practice had varied considerably throughout history. During the American Civil War, both sides had occasionally used enemy uniforms for deception operations without executing captured personnel. In World War I, similar incidents had occurred with inconsistent consequences. Colonel Jaworski's intervention focused on this legal ambiguity.
He argued that execution was only appropriate when infiltrators had used their disguise to commit hostile acts beyond simple military reconnaissance. This distinction between wearing enemy uniforms, potentially a violation of the laws of war but not capital, and using such disguise to commit sabotage or espionage, potentially capital crimes, provided the basis for reviewing the death sentences. For Koenig and several others who had been captured before executing their missions, this review process ultimately saved their lives.
They had worn American uniforms, but had not yet committed acts that clearly constituted espionage or sabotage under the legal standards Jaworski proposed. Their sentences were commuted to imprisonment for the duration of the war. The aftermath of Operation Greif extended far beyond the immediate military context. The operation entered popular culture almost immediately. Articles about Nazi spies in American uniforms appeared in newspapers across the United States. Movies depicted dramatic captures of German infiltrators. The image of the infiltrator, speaking perfect English but betrayed by cultural ignorance, became a staple of war films for decades afterward. This cultural impact reinforced the actual psychological effect. American soldiers returned home with stories of German spies and security paranoia. These narratives influenced post-war American security consciousness, contributing to Cold War concerns about communist infiltration. The techniques developed to counter Skorzeny's commandos found new application in counter-espionage operations against Soviet agents. For the German military leadership, Operation Greif represented a rare success in the war's final stages. With minimal resources and personnel, Skorzeny had achieved significant strategic impact. The operation demonstrated that asymmetric approaches could produce results disproportionate to their size when targeted at psychological vulnerabilities. After the war, military analysts from all major powers studied the operation. The American Army incorporated lessons from both the infiltration techniques and the counter-infiltration responses into its training programs. Soviet military academies included Operation Greif in their curriculum as an example of effective special operations. British special forces adopted elements of Skorzeny's methodology for their own infiltration techniques. The legacy of Operation Greif continues in contemporary military doctrine. Modern special operations forces still study the operation for lessons in deception, adaptation, and psychological warfare. Counterintelligence organizations still implement variations of the security protocols developed to combat Skorzeny's infiltrators. For Lieutenant Maria Koenig, the war's end brought an unexpected future. Released from military prison in 1948, she found herself in a divided Germany with few prospects. Her military experience provided no obvious civilian applications in the conservative post-war society. Her involvement with Skorzeny's operations carried stigma in the new democratic Germany, attempting to distance itself from its Nazi past. Yet Koenig found an unusual opportunity precisely because of her wartime experience. The newly formed West German Intelligence Service, operating under Allied supervision, sought personnel with intelligence backgrounds who were not deeply implicated in Nazi atrocities. Koenig's specialized knowledge of American culture and language, combined with her proven adaptability, made her valuable despite her past. Under a new identity, she worked as a civilian analyst for West German intelligence throughout the 1950s and 1960s, specializing in American cultural and political assessment. Her wartime experience infiltrating American military organizations provided unique insights during the Cold War, when understanding American decision-making became vital to German security.
The baseball questions that had ended her infiltration mission became professionally useful in her new role. The cultural knowledge she had lacked during Operation Greif became her focused expertise afterward.
She developed comprehensive briefing materials on American cultural references, social patterns, and institutional behaviors for German officials interacting with their American counterparts. Koenig never publicly acknowledged her wartime role. Her intelligence work remained classified throughout her lifetime. Only after her death in 1987 did historians begin piecing together her remarkable journey from infiltrator to intelligence professional, from enemy of America to ally during the Cold War. Operation Greif's greatest lesson may be the outsized impact of targeted deception. With minimal resources, barely 150 personnel from an army of millions, Skorzeny created effects that influenced operations across the entire front. This disproportion between input and outcome represents the essence of asymmetric warfare. Small, precisely targeted actions can produce strategic results when they exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Modern military doctrine incorporates this insight across all domains. Information operations, cyber warfare, and special operations all reflect the understanding that perception and psychology can be more decisive than physical force in certain contexts. The infiltrator remains a powerful archetype in security thinking, the adversary who looks like a friend until the critical moment of betrayal. The baseball questions that caught German infiltrators in 1944 have modern equivalents in authentication protocols, verification procedures, and zero-trust security architectures. The fundamental challenge remains the same: distinguishing friend from foe in environments where appearances can be deceiving and stakes are life or death. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.